Well, hello, friends. So I am back from Realm Makers, and I am trying to settle into regular life again, and writing and all of that kind of stuff. And for this week's video, I thought that it would be interesting to do a video on a topic that I've been thinking about a lot because of a lot of the conversations that I was having when I was at Realm Makers, and and then I got a comment on one of my videos here on YouTube asking me to do a video on it. And I thought, well, this subject has been on my mind a lot, so why not tackle it? And the subject really boils down to, how do you find the time to write and do all of the other stuff around writing, especially when writing isn't your full-time job? I talk a lot about how I structure my time and like what I do, but there's a major caveat that's always present in that, whether stated or unstated, which is that this is my full-time job. I write books for a living. And so if I spend 4 to 8 hours a day writing, that's just because that's what I do, right? But it wasn't always like that. So let me tell you a little story about how I got started writing. And then we're going to talk about later in the video some tips and tricks for how you can maximize your writing time, even if you have a lot of other responsibilities, a lot of other things that you have to do. Full-time job, childcare, anything that you might be doing that might get in the way of your writing. How you can structure around that. So I started writing in probably about 2015, and I was very casual with it. I had no real interest in becoming an author. I just wrote because it was fun to do. And over time, though, I started to like it more and more and more. And then eventually I realized that I could actually write books. And I could write complete stories instead of writing like fragments of stories like I was sort of working on at the time. So what I did was I just picked a little bit of time during my day, and I started writing during that time. Well, I'm going to try to write for an hour, let's say, every day. At the time, I had a young family, a wife and 2 young kids, and I was working. In various roles for IT companies. And in about 2018, when I decided that I really wanted to give writing a go, and I really wanted to try and get published, or really, I was pursuing independent publishing. So that's what I was trying to do, right? I wasn't necessarily trying to get published by somebody else. I was trying to publish my own books. During that time, I remember looking at my schedule and thinking to myself, man, there's practically no time to do this, because at that point my schedule was pretty fixed. I would, Monday through Friday, I would wake up at, let's say, 6, be on the road by 6:30, and then I would not get home usually until 6 p.m., right? So 11 and a half hours at work, including my commute time, which is really a lot of time. And then I would get home, and my wife would have been with these 2 little kids all day long and would need, some break. So we would have dinner, and then I would hang out, and I would spend time with the kids. Now, they often went to bed at like 7 or 7:30, which meant that it was only really an hour and a half, there that I could actually see my kids during the weekday. So I spent time with them. And then, my wife has been alone with 2 small children all day. And if you know anything about childcare, it's that after you've been doing it for a little while, you usually want to talk to an adult. And so I would hang out with my wife, right? And we would spend time together from 7 or 7:30 until 9:30 or 10 when we went to bed. So those were very full days. And then Saturday would come around. And on Saturday, There's stuff to do for the house. There's activities with the kids, and so life was just always very busy. And then on Sunday, we go to church in the mornings, and then spend time with other people in the afternoons, or just hang out at home, but spend that time together, in a concentrated way. Because again, I was gone a large part of my week. So I remember sort of scratching my chin and being like, well, how do I do this? When do I do this? Right? And my schedule is not the schedule that I just laid out. I think is fairly typical. It's fairly typical for people to have just sort of every moment of their day sort of blocked out for something. You might not have kids, but you might go to the gym. You might have other responsibilities that you do, a place you volunteer, or something you participate in on a weekly basis. And so it's really easy for life to just be very full. But somehow I found the time to write. And as I reflect on that period of my life, what I realize is that the time I found to write was it was time that existed, and I was just sort of apportioning it to other things, right? Namely sleep, interestingly enough. So one thing that I started doing was I started getting up just a little bit earlier, an hour earlier, to try and write. I also shifted, how I handled my my work, and instead of writing in Word, which was on my computer at home, I started writing in Google Drive, a Google Drive doc, which meant that once I was at work during my 1 hour lunch break, I could take 15 minutes to eat, and I could take 45 minutes to get some words in. And then I discovered something else, which was that, I had a laptop, and while I was hanging out with my wife in the evening, I could sit and I could write. And it wasn't particularly concentrated writing, because, sometimes we would talk, and sometimes she would watch her show, and sometimes she would read a book, and sometimes, again, we would chat. But I could be there next to her, right, in proximity, and I could write as well. And so over time, that just sort of built, right? And then one day I looked up from what I was doing, from this, exceptionally busy life that I had made for myself, and I said, wait a second. I could just do this writing thing and give myself more time to write, and that more time to write would mean more words done, and more words done would mean more books released, and more books released would mean higher income. And I would actually be able to just sort of replace the income that I make at my regular day job, working, 10 to 12 hours a day, with writing. So why don't I do that? And that is essentially how I went full time. Writing for maybe two hours a day in total. Sometimes a little bit more. Occasionally, I would get up early on a Saturday and I'd do a few hours in the morning. But that consistency is really ultimately what carried me through. It's not the amount of time you spend writing every day. It's the number of days in a row that you write. Ultimately, after making the transition, I discovered that having more time in the day doesn't necessarily mean you get more work done. And there's this weird thing that happens where we say to ourselves, well, once I have time, right? Once I have time, I'm just going to write a lot and I'll get so much done and it'll be fantastic. But the reality is that what we prioritize is what gets done. And so if we don't approach our writing with that concept of prioritization, then we're just not going to make progress. And no matter how little time we have, if we approach our writing with that sense of proper prioritization, we will get a lot done. I remember reading a web novel back in the day and then being stunned when I discovered that the author had written close to 1 million words on their phone while commuting to and from school. All right? So it was like 25 minutes one way, so 50 minutes a day, and they just typed out their novel on their phone. And obviously they'd been doing it for years and years and years, but it's that consistency that ultimately allows us to succeed. Not having the perfect schedule or not, having the perfect conditions. No, it's prioritizing it above everything else. Let's talk about how we can think through the structure of our time and our day in order to maximize the amount of time we have to write. The most important thing, the absolute most important thing, if you want to become a writer or if you want to become an author, somebody who writes regularly, is to prioritize it. It has to take precedence over other things in your life. Now, it shouldn't take precedence over over everything else in your life. That's not healthy. So it's important that you understand what your goals are and like what it is you want to do, right? In fact, what might be really good is to take a moment right now and to write down what your optimal day looks like. If you could just wave a magic wand and when you get up tomorrow morning, have your best day, what would it actually look like? Because that's going to really identify for you whether or not writing is a priority. How far down on the list does writing go? One thing I find that a lot of writers hold in common, and almost every author I know holds in common, is that writing is in their top 3 or 4 things that they want to do in a day, right? If you give them a free day, clear from all of the constraints of stress and clear from all of the constraints of their, deadlines and stuff like that, writing ranks in the top things that they want to do. And if that's not the case for you, then might I suggest that you might be in love with the idea of being a writer or the perception of being a writer, but you're actually not in love with writing. And that's okay. That's all right. You don't have to be in love with writing. You don't have to be a writer. You can like the aesthetic, right? But if you want to be a writer, then writing does have to be a thing you want to do. And it has to be in the top, 3 or 4 things that you want to do. But what are some other things that might be in that list? I don't know for you. I know for me, though. So if I were able to wave a magic wand and have my perfect day, well, I would get up probably pretty early in the morning when everything is quiet, when there's space and time to think. And I would go get a cup of coffee and I would sit on my back porch or in my kitchen and I would watch the sunrise come up. Because the sunrise is beautiful and I like that space to think. But then after it came up, I'd go have breakfast and talk to my family. I'd hang out with my wife and my kids and help them get breakfast and off to school and that kind of stuff. And then I would go and sit down and I would start writing. And I would work on, a story that I'm excited to tell. And I'd probably spend time doing that until lunch. And then at noon, I'd love to incorporate some exercise to get my blood flowing, get my brain moving, right? Maybe listen to a nonfiction book about something fascinating. Then after lunch, I might do some more writing, but I might not. Instead, what I think would be really fun would be to go and meet some people, have coffee and talk about some interesting things, right? Explore some cool ideas or maybe work on a business that, that I'm trying to brew. Have some meetings, engage with people, get to talk. Then there's dinner. I love the family dinners that we have. And so that's what I would do. I would sit with my family and I would eat, but I would also invite a friend. I would invite somebody to come and share a meal with us and interact with us. And then after dinner, I'd love to play a board game. I'd love to play something fun. Probably a pretty complicated board game. My favorite board game is Spirit Island, which is a pretty complicated board game. But there are any number of games that I'd love to play, maybe with a small group of people. And then I would love to sit either on my porch or, in the living room and just talk. Talk with my friends and talk with my wife. And then, maybe 10, 11, go to bed and get up the next day to do it all over again. And that's my conception of a perfect day. Now, reality is going to say, Seth, that's pretty much impossible to do. You simply cannot do that every day, right? There are too many constraints on your life. But you know what I can do? I can look at that and say, okay, what's important to me? Clearly, writing is important to me. I love writing and I want to write. I want to write stories. I want to tell stories. What else is important to me? My family, spending time with my wife and my kids, direct one-on-one engagement with them. What else is important for me? Having time to think and process. Another thing that's important to me is spending time with my friends, spending time with other people and exploring new ideas and interesting things. So you can see that all of these things that I have, that I would stick into my perfect day, they're all priorities in my life. Or at least I want them to be priorities. Again, sometimes there are constraints. I have to work and I have to make money, which means I have to hit deadlines, which means sometimes I have to write more than just 4 hours a day. Sometimes I don't have the luxury of waking up and having that time to myself because there's other stuff going on. And that's okay. Sometimes my friends aren't available to come over and play games. That's all right. I have to work inside the constraints that I have. Instead of thinking about like, how can I structure my time to get closer to my optimal day or to my perfect day? Instead, we think to ourselves, there's nothing that I can do. I am bound by my constraints and I am stuck. While I was at Realmakers, I was teaching with E.A. Winters, who is just phenomenally talented as a writer and happens to be a licensed counselor and is just wickedly smart when it comes to understanding ourselves. And something that she likes to say is, do not identify as a stuck person. And when I heard her say that for the first time, I was like, man, doesn't that just describe the majority of my life? Because I often identify as someone who is trapped by my circumstances or is stuck in what I'm doing. I shouldn't do that. Instead, I should identify myself as a person who is making progress, as a person who is exploring new things. And when I do that, often I find that I just naturally become unstuck. So when we're thinking about our perfect day and then looking at our reality and trying to match those two things up, instead of saying, man, I'm just bound by my constraints and there's nothing I can do about it, instead, what we should be doing is saying, okay, so how can I get my day with the constraints that I have closer to my optimal day? One thing that I could do is I could just commit to going to bed a little bit earlier. Because when I go to bed a little bit earlier, I can wake up and I can have that time to sit and think in the morning when it's quiet. I can watch the sunrise. I can have my coffee. And then, naturally, I'll be available to help my, kids get breakfast and off to school and help my wife out. And then, once that's done, then I can go start my work day. But if, on the other hand, I stay up way late, right? I stay up late, and I'm going to bed at, 11:30, 12, 1, then getting up early becomes a real problem. So if my perfect day includes being up early and having that meditative time to myself, if that's actually a priority for me, it makes sense that I would go to bed 9:30, 10 o'clock. Because then I can actually do this thing that I say I want to do. In the same way, when I, think about my perfect day, it includes writing for a few hours in the morning. 4+ hours. I like to write a lot. For me, if I'm finding that my constraints don't allow that, how do I get closer? Now, right now, obviously, I'm a full-time writer, so I have a lot of freedom in how I organize my schedule. But what if I didn't? What if I had to, at 6:30, get in the car and drive to work? Well, the time that I spend in the car could be used to dictate. And though it's kind of frustrating to do, at least initially, I know a lot of people who do it. It's something that you can learn. It's a skill that you can acquire, right? And so you could spend your, half an hour, 45 minutes on the way to work just utilizing that time to write. And yeah, it's not 4 hours of uninterrupted time, but it's something. And then at lunchtime, after working until lunch, I could go for a walk and I could dictate. Or I could, sit at my computer and I could open up a Google Drive document and I could write. So I could get a few, minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the morning. I could get 45 minutes at lunch. And then after coming home and, engaging with my family or doing whatever I needed to do, go to the gym, make dinner, that kind of stuff, I could just say, before I get online, before I turn on the TV, before I do anything else, I'm just going to crack open my laptop, or I'm going to get on my computer, or I'm going to get my phone out, right? And I'm going to write for an hour. And I'll just see what happens. I'll see what gets done. So while I'm not able to necessarily manufacture my perfect day, I am able, throughout the day, to pick the things that are a priority for me and just do those things. And so if writing is a priority, I could, again, squeeze in an hour before work. I could squeeze in an hour at lunch or half an hour or however long. And I could squeeze in some time in the evening as well. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait, I went from 0 writing a day to 2.5 hours of writing a day. And that's pretty good. 2.5 hours of writing after you've gotten into it is easily enough to write 5,000 words. Even if it's sort of fractured time. And if you can write 5,000 words a day, you're already ahead of most professional authors. I think this is the thing that I had to change in my mindset when I was trying to work up to doing this full time, which is that any amount of time spent writing is better than no amount of time spent writing. This is why we say better than 0. So imagine with me that you write 300 words in the morning, right? 300 words should take you like 15 minutes, absolute max, right? 300 words in the morning. You write 300 words at lunch, and you write 300 words in the evening. You're spending a total of 45 minutes doing that, right? An hour any time during the day will probably get you to about 1,000 words. But let's say you're only doing 300 in the morning, 300 at lunch, and 300 in the evening. Every day, you write 900 words. Every week, you're writing about 4,500 words, which means that within 6 months, you can have a 100,000-word novel. This is why consistency is so much more important than volume. 6 months to write a novel is amazing. It's really good. I know that sometimes people look at what I do and they say to themselves, yeah, but Seth, 6 months is such a long time. You write novels in a week. I say, yeah, But I also have all the time to do it. And I have been practicing for years and years and years and years and years. If you're just starting out, 6 months is fantastic. It's incredibly good. Most people take at least a year and a half, often longer, to write their first novel. In fact, I think the average is probably somewhere around 2 years. So, don't knock spending 15 minutes to write 300 words. Don't think to yourself, I only have this little bit of time. I'm hardly going to get anything done. It's absolutely not worth it. No, the goal is simply consistency. And what you'll find is that over time, you get faster at writing, which means that the time you spend is more effective. But you'll also find that as you write, and as you find yourself, reading your words that you have written, you're going to prioritize it more, and you're going to find more time to do it. There's just this sort of natural flywheel effect that happens when you do this. The first thing you want to do, if you want to write a book, if you want to try to find time, is you need to break up your thinking around writing. You need to not identify as a stuck person, as a person constrained by their circumstances. You need to break down the amount of time you're spending writing into smaller units, right? Think about it in terms of 15-minute segments to get those 300 words in, instead of thinking I need an hour or 2 hours or, however many hours. 3, you need to focus on consistency. You just need to be super consistent with showing up every day to write. And finally, 4, you need to prioritize it. When you have the option of getting on your phone to scroll, instead write a few hundred words. When you have the option of going and playing a video game, instead write a few hundred words. When you have the option of picking up a book to read it, instead write a few hundred words. Or what I used to do is I used to tell myself, let me write first, and then I'm going to go do XYZ. And sometimes I'd only get in a few hundred words, and then I'd be like, that's good. And I'd put my writing away, and I would go and I would play the video game, or I would go hang out with people, or I would go read the book. But prioritize the writing. Do it first. Make a habit of making writing your primary thing. And what you'll find is that before you know it, you're going to have written multiple books. Before you know it, it's going to be a viable path forward. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. I know it was long and kind of rambly. But if you have anything you'd like clarification on, or anything you would like me to cover, definitely leave it in the comments below. Just know that I appreciate all of you. I really think you guys are great. And I'm cheering for you as you write your books. See ya.